Welcome to the National Museum of the American Indians webinar series, Youth in Action, Conversations About Our Future. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michaela Pavla. I'm a citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians and a cultural interpreter at the National Museum of the American Indian. Youth in Action is a monthly webinar series featuring young Native activists and changemakers from across the Western Hemisphere who are working towards equity and social justice for Indigenous peoples. As we begin today's program, I would like to gratefully acknowledge the Native peoples on whose ancestral homelands we gather, as well as the diverse and vibrant Native communities who make their home here today. In celebration of Indigenous Peoples Day, our conversation will highlight youth of blended Black and Indigenous heritage who use art, activism, and policy to advance Black and Indigenous solidarity and affect positive change in their communities. To facilitate this conversation, please welcome our guest moderator, Amber Starks.
Hesche, Estongo, Amber Chehochepkados, Muscogee Does, Lestogi Does, Amalagida, Lojagogi, Moment Omatoa, Lojapoga. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Amber. I am a citizen of the Muscogee Creek Nation. My tribal town is Lojapoga, or the place where turtles dwell, and my clan is the Turtle Clan. I'm also very much a proud Black African-American woman. So before I begin, I want to first acknowledge that I'm currently on Kalapuya land, also known as Portland, Oregon. And I also just want to give a shout out to the Kalapuya people and all the other tribes of the Pacific Northwest. Lastly, I want to acknowledge that at one time, Oregon was known as the white man's paradise and excluded Black folks through legislation such as sundown laws, many of which didn't come off the books until relatively recently. So the work that I do today and every day on Kalapuya land is in honor of both Native and Black folks who have endured and resisted under white supremacy, settler colonialism, and racial capitalism. So I'm very much indebted to my forebears, and I'm going to use my voice in everything I do to uplift Native and Black folks of the present, of the past, and of the future. So with that, I would like to say welcome to this conversation. I'm so honored to be moderating this specific conversation highlighting and exploring Afro-Indigenous and Black Native identity. The panelists and I will be speaking to what it means to be Black and Native, and specifically what it means to exist at this intersectional identity. We'll be unpacking the ins and outs of belonging to both our communities and doing that with as much nuance as possible. So you're going to hear words such as Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Indigeneity, Black Native, Black-Indigenous, Afro-Native, American Indian, Indigenous Native. You're going to hear all these like really brilliant words. And I know the panelists, along with I, will do our best to define and contextualize each of these terms so that we don't leave you guys hanging with vocab that you're like, what? So before I get started, though, I would like to give the panelists a chance to each introduce themselves. And I would love to start with Autumn.
Tabutni, thank you for that introduction, Amber. Wanikisa, good day, or Akwe, as I like to say hello. And Akwe in my language means I see the light in you. And this is one way that we as Shinnecock people introduce each other or say hello to each other, because it's important to recognize the light and the beauty in each other. So Akwe, I see the light in you. Autumn Rose, Musqueam and Nuxqua, Noisiwank Williams, Tishiwank. My name is Autumn Rose. My Shinnecock name is Musqueam and Nuxqua, or Raspberry Star Woman, because I was born during the raspberry season on a starry night. I'm from the Shinnecock Nation, located on Long Island, New York, and I am the former Miss Native American USA 2017-2018. My background is in public relations, and I currently work as the communications coordinator for the Administration for Native Americans. I am a proud Shinnecock woman and Black woman, and I'm so honored to be on this panel today. So, tabutni, or thank you.
Mado, Autumn, I'm so glad to be on this panel with you as well, because I feel like you and I have interacted online, but it's nice to just like see your face, be in this conversation with you, because I just think that your presence online is always so loving and open and accepting, and I just think you provide this really safe space for Black Natives and all Natives. So I'm so excited to share this space with you. So I would love for Joy to introduce herself or yourself to everybody.
Oki, ni Daniku Sobaki, ni Ontuptuk Sukokutoki. So, hello, my name is Joy. My Blackfoot name is Sobaki, which means windy woman. I am an Indigenous woman, part of the Kainai blood tribe in southern Alberta, which is part of the Blackfoot Confederacy. We've been speaking about land, also recognizing that for many of our people, our identities don't get cut off at the border. So the Blackfoot Confederacy extends into the United States across Montana to our Blackfeet neighbors. I'm also an African American woman and a Black Canadian woman as well. I currently work and study. I am a recent graduate student at the Carleton University in Ottawa, which is on the Algonquin and Anishinaabe land, traditional lands. I am studying to be a journalist in the Master's of Journalism program, having recently have a degree in a bachelor's degree in history and First Nation studies and a master's degree in political science, specializing in transitional justice and post-conflict reconstruction. For the last 9 years, I was also an elite track and field athlete competing internationally for Team Canada in the 100-meter hurdles, and have just retired, tried to use my platform as a way to inspire Indigenous youth in Canada and to make myself visible as an Indigenous person in sport. And am now using my platform and shifting forward into journalism and helping tell the stories of Indigenous and Black people in Canada and the United States in the best ways I can. So thank you for having me be part of this panel, and I'm excited to have the conversations we're going to talk about today.
Meadow Joy, I also feel really fortunate to be sharing this space with you, because I think that I recently started following you on Instagram, I believe. And so it's nice that getting to know you is happening live kind of in this space versus online, which sometimes we only get so much of what people want to share about themselves online. And so this feels like a real introduction versus the other way, where oftentimes we meet people online first. So Meadow for being here, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you as well. So last but not least, Kyle, there's so many things that I could say about you, but I'm going to let you do the honors of introducing yourself to folks, and then maybe I'll add whatever it is I feel like I want to add to the end of that.
Miigwech, Amber, appreciate the love. And like everyone else, I'm very fortunate and excited to be a part of this, I think, important and historic conversation. So my name is Kyle Mays. I'm a Afro-Indigenous person, African American in Saginaw, Chippewa. I'm currently on Tonga Gabrielino lands, also known as Los Angeles, California. And I'm an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies, American Indian Studies, and History at UCLA. And I have a forthcoming book called An Afro-Indigenous History of the United States, which I'm thrilled to be out in the world. This comes out in November, so I'm excited to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Well, Meadow, I feel like sometimes you can be so modest that I was about to hype you. So I'm glad you hyped yourself, because you are that guy. So, yeah, I'm just really glad to be here. And I feel like this conversation is necessary. And I feel like when I was asked to moderate and think about questions I wanted to ask, I thought about the times that I was on panels and felt like I didn't get to express, different ideas. And so I tried to think of things that I thought maybe all of us would want to communicate to audience about what it means to be Black and Native, or Afro-Indigenous. So let's just jump right in. I think the first question will even just speak to that. So maybe we can start with Joy, but I would love to know, what does it mean to you to be a Black Indigenous, Black Native person? And what does that mean where you come from? And in other words, how do you see yourself, and how do other people see you or label you? And did things like phenotype or colorism play into to that politic at any point?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question to start on, especially as we talk about, the word Black and what that means. Because I believe when you're talking about Black in the context of the United States, as well as talk about in the context of Canada, it definitely changes. I identify as an African American woman because my family comes from the United States and from the slave trade in the South in that way. My father's African American, and he met my mom, who is a Blackfoot woman from Alberta, when she was at graduate school, and he moved up to Canada. But our family does not follow the Underground Railroad in that way. I don't come from an Underground Railroad, so I don't identify as an African Canadian in that sense. And there is also this sense of Black, depending on where you go, especially out east here, is that I've had a lot of people kind of look at me and ask, like, oh, well, what island do you come from? Because they're assuming I will have been part of the immigration waves of Black people from the Caribbean and Central America coming up that way. And I don't. So I've had, conversations where I've had to try to have that conversation with Black people and white people about how I identify as a Black person in Canada, as an African American person, and as a Black Canadian in a different way that some people might have seen and might have experienced. So, there is that. And then there's this idea of, you've talked about this idea of colorism, which has changed in different instances as I've grown up. I've had times where I have embraced looking as a Black passing person over being an Indigenous person to kind of hide from racism as a younger woman and as a child and a teenager. And then I've had instances where I have to, kind of fight to be recognized for being an Indigenous person, because people don't know I'm Indigenous until they see my name, which, I have this idea of where I can hide or not hide, but then there's also the complexity of that, of being like, why do I need to hide, as I don't fit your standard of what an Indigenous person looks like, and trying to make myself fit into what somebody thinks I should look like. So it is an interesting intersection to exist at, but I think it's also a very powerful intersection to be at, and it's a place that we don't look at too often, and our stories are not told in ways. And it wasn't really until this panel that I've met other Black Indigenous people. So it really is exciting to be a part of this panel in that sense, to have, a chance to kind of talk about what it is to experience this, because growing up, it was literally me and my brother. That was all I knew in terms of when it came to Black people. And, all their mixed families that I saw were not Black and Indigenous families that I saw, that kind of mixture, that kind of blend. So it is an interesting place to be at. It can be painful. It can be overwhelming, especially in these past years with all of the social justice and the issues that have been happening both in the United States and in Canada, especially recently with the findings of children's graves from the residential schools. So it can be painful, but it can also be very powerful.
Yeah, there's a couple things that I appreciate that you said. I think speaking to the complexity of our identities as Black and Native folks, we're not a monolith, right? There are such different and vast experiences, but that still doesn't negate, that, we are both Black and Native. So I appreciate you kind of explaining what it means for you to exist as a Black Canadian and African American woman. And, I'm sure that those of us who are in in the United States don't necessarily have to navigate that identity. So I think that that's really an important point that you bring up. And I also think one of the things you talked about is like how our identities change through time, depending on who, how people see us at different points of our lives. And oftentimes that, we're often having to perform for people to make them feel comfortable about our identities. Which almost seems, like endless work, right? That's never something that we can arrive at. And it almost comes to the point where we just have to decide to be whoever we are, at that point in time. So I appreciate that, your response. How about you, Joy? Do you mind sharing what it means to you to be a Black Indigenous and Black Native person, where you come from, and how did people see you growing up and label you and define you? And were there issues around phenotype and colorism? I'm sorry, Autumn. I said Joy. I meant Autumn.
I figured. I was like, should I go in?
Please.
My experience is a little different because both of my parents are Shinnecock and Black. And my mom was a teacher, and she loves research, and she really instilled in us a sense of who we are and where we come from. So for me, I never really saw a separation in this, like, are you Black or are you Native? What do you identify with more? And things like that until I left my reservation. When I went to college, I grew up in a household where my mom taught and sang Negro spirituals and Shinnecock social songs. So it was like this experience of being Shinnecock and being Black wasn't so separate for me, because I learned about who I was as a Black woman just as much as I learned about who I am as a Shinnecock woman, and then also learning about the history within the United States of the intersectionality and the coming together in the storied history of Black and Native people. And I find it so interesting that when I went to school, everyone wants to figure out who I am. Nobody asked me what my name is, how am I doing? The first thing they do when they see me is like, oh, what are you? Human? We have this fixation on categorizing people, and it was almost jarring for people to hear I identify with both, and I'm so intertwined with both of my identities. So I don't know, when I think about what it means to be Black and Native, it's just who I am, you know? And there is a lot of connection and overlap between those experiences. And yeah.
And I agree with you. People are really fixated on placing us, right? Like our phenotype suggests this, so how can we be something else? And that for some people is just it's a hard hurdle to get over. And it's like you said, we're human beings and we can exist as like these multi-dimensional, beings. And that there's nothing that we have to do to like prove that who we are other than be who we are. And so I understand, people wanting us to compartmentalize so that they feel comfortable. And I just think that, it's unnecessary, but it's something that people have to learn to navigate. But I think as Black Indigenous folks, I think we are getting to the point where we're not even allowing folks to like tell us how to exist for them to feel comfortable, because that's not even their right. Kyle, do you want to chime in and tell us what it means to you to be a Black Native person, and where you come from? How did people see you and define you, and what were their politics around phenotype and colorism for you?
Yeah, so I'll answer that via just give a very, very short family history. So my great grandmother, Esther Chabuz, who later became Esther Chabuz Mays, or Keanoqueo's her indigenous name, came from the reservation, the Isabella Reservation in Michigan, to Detroit in the spring of 1940 at 16. Shortly thereafter, she met my great grandfather, who is African American, and they produced these Afro-Indigenous children in the city of Detroit, which are my grandmother, of course, and my great aunties, and they were real activists in the city of Detroit. Shout out to my aunt Judy, founded what was the third ever public school with the Native American curriculum, Medicine Bear American Indian Academy. And I say all that to say is I'm deeply invested personally with this. Shout out to my mom. My mom is African American from Cleveland, Ohio. So, I support LeBron James wherever he goes. But so personally, like, these things are very important to me, thinking about this particular question. And in the family, it wasn't a big deal. Like, I feel like talking to you all, I'm talking to all my cousins, because they all have all varieties, different shades and colors. So I feel right at home. But for political reasons, I think it's important to identify and reclaim the phrase Afro-Indigenous, because if I or we as a collective are identified as Afro-Indigenous, at first not by our own choosing in many ways, then I think it's important to at least put right on the table, if we have to be identified racially and politically in a certain way, why do people who are white passing or white coded, why do they not have to identify as white Native, right? And people always get very upset about that. They think it's, oh, we're not a race. Native people are not a race. I'm like, well, your Afro-Indigenous kin are racialized, right? If you're a white Native, or, you look Native, whatever that means, you are also racialized as well. And until we really deal with the issue of whiteness, right? You can't whiteness and sweep it under the rug. You have to confront it front and center. And until we deal with that, we're not going to really deal with white supremacy and anti-blackness within many of our communities. I just think it's the right thing to really confront, and which is why I'm so excited to be on this panel with you all.
Can I jump in quickly just to respond to something that Kyle said? But just what you're talking about, but that idea of like white Indigenous people don't have to identify as white Indigenous, but I think it is what you said is that we don't address this idea that there is racism that exists within our own communities and between our communities, especially, we've seen a lot of these ideas of solidarity. I know we're going to talk about that later, so I won't get into it now, but, we ignore the fact that there is racism against Black people within our communities, and it's not talked about. And it's kind of almost like a taboo to talk about the fact that, there's racism both ways between Black Indigenous people and then Indigenous people towards Black people. So it is kind of this idea that to almost have to claim yourself as Black Indigenous is to almost claim yourself as an other to both groups in which you situate yourself in.
Absolutely. I definitely feel, oftentimes online, I feel this pressure, which I'm learning not to feel. Let me make that clear. That people they want you to perform indigeneity a certain way, or they want you to compartmentalize your Blackness so that they feel that you're being loyal to, Indigenous people. And I think something, Kyle, you said really struck, or hit something in my brain about, when you were just talking about your family history, about the generations of Afro-Indigenous folks, right? I think oftentimes people see this as like a new thing, right? Like it just started happening this generation. Like we are the first Afro-Indigenous people to ever exist. And I know in my own family story, Afro-Indigeneity goes back a couple of generations. And I think that this idea of like we are some kind of anomaly needs to be addressed. And I think that goes with what you said, Joy. It's like there are real issues in our community around anti-Blackness and seeing Black natives as inauthentic. And I think that, just pointing out the fact that this isn't relatively new, right? Like since Black and Native folks have been in contact, we have been having families together, right? And I think that that's an important point to share, because I think people, like I said, think that this is a relatively new phenomena. And it's like, no, Black and Indigenous folks have been, in platonic relationships, in romantic relationships, and political relationships for a really long time. So with that, Autumn, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just piggyback off of what you're saying, and it makes sense. You have these two groups of people within a society that is oppressing us. Why wouldn't these two groups of people who are so oppressed come together and find that understanding between each other? My great grandmother, my Nana, she went to residential schools in upstate New York, and when we talk about how ingrained the ism is between these two communities and how problematic it has been, when Shinnecock people would go to these residential schools, there was a term that they used to separate the kids called monig. And the kids who were more nigger than Indian were treated differently or excluded in a different way. So you have to realize, if we know that the residential schools has an effect on us, and we talk about historical trauma and all of that to the present day, why wouldn't those ideologies of using terms like monig or things like that also affect our communities present day? And us here on the panel still experiencing these isms, being Black and being Native,
Absolutely. And it's, as Black Native peoples, I want people to understand, not only did my family endure, my Black family endure, and even some of my Native family endure chattel slavery, but I also had family members who walked the Trail of Tears, who did go to, who were stolen and taken to boarding schools. And so to deny any part of my identity simply because of my phenotype is problematic. And it also is harmful to, and contributes to the erasure of Indigenous people and, the commodification of Black folks. So yes to all you all have said. And so with that, I would love to then find out, what has your life experience taught you or is currently teaching you about existing at the intersection of Black and Native identity? And how does your lived experience inform the work that you do or activism that you do as a Black and Indigenous person? And I would love to start with Autumn.
So I listen to these motivational speeches in the morning, and one of them is like, living is hard, and living is hard. Each and every one of us, Black, Native, Asian, Latino, we all go through things that are hard to live with and to deal with. And I think for me, because I am so connected to who I am as a Shinnecock woman, and I've learned so much about it, for me, being Black and being Native is a sense of empowerment for me. I'm so proud of who I am. And it's almost like me commanding and being proud and standing in that is my way of pushing back on all of these external factors that continuously try to bring me down. And I think for anybody who is going through their own identity journey is to know that when you do take the time to learn who you are and where you come from, and not even just where you come from, what you identify with you, between you and you, like that is powerful in itself. And my ability to be proud of my Blackness and to be equally proud of being a Shinnecock woman is the thing that gives me a foundation to keep moving forward every single day. And whatever that is for you, whether it's you telling the world, no, I'm proud to be a trans woman, or I'm proud to be Dene, or I'm proud to be Black. Be proud in that and stand in that despite what anybody else has to say. Because for me, it's the core of all the work I do. At one point when I was in school studying public relations, I was like, oh, I really want to go and do sports PR because I love sports. And I still love sports, but there was no purpose in it for me. And my purpose in my life is continuously to stand up and to show up for my community that has supported me. And that is my journey and that is my story. So for me, being a Black Native and being Shinnecock and being Black, it's my foundation, it's my empowerment, it's my why, it's my continuation for the work that I do every single day.
Hear, hear. I feel like, man, that reminded me, your answer reminded me that, there are times where I'm online and people are just being so violent and so cruel. And I feel like I've had to come to this place where I had to ask myself, who are you? Are you who they say you are? Or who are you? And I really started grounding my identity in the fact that my grandmother is proud that I'm a Black and Native woman, right? She told me that she was so proud of me for being proud to be an Indian, because she thought at one point, I didn't identify as a Black Native person. And I told her it wasn't that, I just wasn't sure that I was allowed to, and so I think that you're so right. Standing in who you are is a refusal to these systems. It's a refusal to individuals who would question our authenticity as both Black and Native people. So that rings so true to me because I have been working so hard to be like, it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter how much you don't like me. I'm still a Black and Native woman. You can take your dislike and go somewhere else because here I am. I choose to exist because this is my inheritance, right? So I appreciate that, seeing this as an empowering lived experience versus a burden, right? This is something that I'm grateful for. Why would I see this as anything other than an empowering existence? So Kyle. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
It's just one more thing. We are our ancestors' wildest dreams. We are the descendants of the people they tried to kill, Black and Native. So yes, everything that you just said.
Kyle, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I would approach this question by framing it with a few questions that I have often gotten throughout my life and a variety of interactions from going through universities to speaking engagements. So one of the first ones is, "Are you ashamed of being Black?" Which I often might get from some of my fellow Black folks. The other one is, "Why are you wearing those earrings?" I've experienced in a variety of places, from a powwow to an academic conference to being in a native space at a university. The other one is, "You didn't grow up on the res," as if all Native people grew up on a reservation. There ain't nothing wrong with the reservation. I'm cool with it, but that is not my experience. I did not grow up on a reservation. Of course, most of us have been to our cousins hanging out or whatever, or go visit frequently, but just because you grew up on a res, that doesn't make you culturally better than or knowing more of your particular history and culture, and vice versa too. Another thing is, are you Cherokee? No shade at the five tribes. Sorry, Amber, no shade at the five tribes. But that experience, and it is important and significant for history at writ large, right? But that's not the only Afro-Indigenous peoples that exist in the Americas. It's not the only people, and often it can dominate certain discussions around like assumption. Like if you identify as Afro-Indigenous, therefore you're Cherokee or Muscogee Creek or something. It's like no, hit the brakes, calm down. There are a variety and a great diversity of people, and one of the reasons I even wrote this Afro-Indigenous History of the United States book was because, to me, there still lacks a critical analysis of Blackness and indigeneity outside of the five tribes, and looking at a variety of other intersections, right? And so, for me, it's important to bring that. I mean, now, who's everyone's favorite, probably Afro-Indigenous person? Kyrie Irving, probably.
Yep.
Right, because people love celebrity. I love Kyrie. I love Kyrie's game, but that's probably like, oh, we love that person. But what about us regular, schmegular, everyday Afro-Indigenous folks who don't make millions of dollars and don't have some really cool sneakers? I mean, I wish they would give Professor sneakers. I would be down. Like Nike, holler at me about an endorsement. But like those things are important to really discuss and analyze. And lastly, right, there's a huge diversity of Afro-Indigenous peoples, and I think hopefully we're getting to the point where we respect that diversity and embrace it. Right, there's just like the diversity of Native people in general. There's a diversity of Afro-Indigenous people and experiences.
For real though, like I think this panel just shows that, everything you just said in one, here we are, right? Existing as like our beautiful Black and Native selves. And, I that question of are you ashamed is like really pertinent, because I think that a lot of us navigate that, right? We, as young folks, we navigate our hair texture, our skin color, like I've spoken to some of you about, like people talking about my nose, I think as Black Native folks, we are constantly navigating, who we are, and are we ashamed? And I feel like I'm at this space where no, like I choose, like Autumn says, I choose to live this life that I've been gifted, right? If there is another life, I want to come back as a Black and Native person. Like I love who I am, and there is no shame in being Black and Native. And the other thing you said really about us having these different lived experiences. I really want people to know that we are real natives, no matter where we grew up, no matter what our experiences have been, whether we've lived on the res or have been urban natives or experienced both. Being native doesn't necessarily mean, where you grew up specifically, right? Because we are all experiencing settler colonialism and white supremacy every day. That is something that we have to navigate as Native folks, as Black folks, as, Afro-Indigenous folks. And so being really Native doesn't have to do with whether you live on the res or not, right? Yeah,
Yes,
I want people
it's
to understand that authenticity, that we can be authentic, whether we are res or urban natives, whether we speak our languages or not, whether we're reconnecting or not, right? Like that. And I think that's something we'll get into a bit, but just, people trying to, learn who they are, as we're enduring white supremacy and settler colonialism. Kyle, you
yeah,
have something?
it's like not to get too academic, and this will be the last thing I say about anything like super academic, but like it's fetishizing a commodity. So Karl Marx has this like concept of the fetishism of commodity. And so we will fetishize the res as a commodity or fetishize authenticity as a commodity, something you can exchange with. So you adorn yourself with certain forms of earrings, certain forms of bougie native jewelry, and all of a sudden you're much more authentic, right? But you can't be black and wear that.
No.
Don't do that.
No, that's too much of a contradiction, right? That, if you wear, say you wear dashiki, you cannot be the native. And it's those, like, again, it's people wanting us to compartmentalize. And I think that that's one, people don't have the authority to tell Black natives how to exist, what they can wear. And then I think us as Black natives have to, I know for me, I check myself, why am I wearing these beaded earrings? Which, I wonder if other non-Black native folks even have to do that. But I know that there are times where I put on ribbon skirts and I'm like, am I doing this so other people will like recognize me? Because otherwise, if I just show up, in my 2-strand twist or my big hair, and some jeans, are people going to be like, what are you doing here? Right. But yeah, that's a good word. So I want to let Joy answer because we all have been taking up space. So Joy, okay. So the question is, what has your life experience taught you or is currently teaching you about existing at the intersection of Black and Native identity? And how does your lived experience inform your work or your activism as a Black Indigenous person?
Yeah, so I think it has all somehow accumulated in the last couple years, but it was a process because, growing up, we've talked a lot about the res. Like I didn't grow up on the res, although my mom's family is from the res and my mom's from there as well. But we were taught ceremonies, we were taught our teachings, so we grew up in a very traditional family in that way. And we would go, visit our family. We'd go to Sundance powwows, all those things. So I understood what it meant to me and to our family to be an Indigenous person. But, growing up in small town Alberta, it didn't feel safe to be an Indigenous person. So I tried to hide it a lot, but also it didn't feel safe to be a Black person. So I really struggled with that identity for a long time. And I remember once I got to university and I started to excel more in athletics that I was in, it started to occur to me there was this one event that we did at Western University in Canada as part of our team. It was an Indigenous Youth Track and Field Day. And somehow it kind of got around that I was the Indigenous track person on our team. And I became that kind of focal point for the event. But I was really aware it wasn't about me, it was about the youth. And I just remember kind of realizing that the kind of power I could have just by being visible as an Indigenous person, as an Indigenous athlete to these youth. And I started to embrace it more. I started to, embrace those teachings and things that I had learned that I'd shut out for so long. And it just, the more it kind of became about how important it was for me to be a visible Indigenous athlete in Canada. And it wasn't that there were no Indigenous athletes. To this day, I know quite a few that I have good relationships with, but at that point, and even growing up, like I didn't know any. Like you didn't see these people on TV. They weren't celebrated. Our stories weren't told. So just to be able to make myself visible in that way, I thought was just like a small form of advocacy that I could do. And since then, it's grown. I've been a part of different councils and boards of directors as an Indigenous person and as a Black person. Now because I started to kind of realize in these last couple of years, especially when everything happened with the George Floyd movement, And, people were starting to ask for these statement, the big thing about making your statement of solidarity with Black Lives Matter. That was a thing, because that solves all problems. But I remember all of a sudden realizing that people didn't see me as a Black person anymore because people only saw me as an Indigenous person. And I had to kind of start to really fight to be seen as a Black person, because I had, I've been on sports teams and I've been in places in my life where I've just been, called that light-skinned girl, which is, okay, so I'm not Black enough for you, but I'm also not white. So where do I sit in these instances? So really having to kind of find my own Blackness in a sense and find where I sit in that. And it started to evolve more in the writing I do. I started a blog after I graduated from university as I was doing my journey to qualify for the Olympics and be a visible, Indigenous person that way. But now my writing has changed a lot, and I find I'm examining these intersections more, and I'm examining, Black culture that I've experienced, and really trying to find my place in Black culture, because sometimes I feel like it's lost, having been separated from it where I grew up, and or feeling excluded from it, and trying to find my place in it, from experimenting with braids to, feeling okay about dyeing my hair, because my hair has been my one connection to Black culture for me. And so I am really trying to find my place within this advocacy now, and find how I can, as myself, be a person that I would want to see growing up.
Absolutely. That resonates with me so much, because I do think, visibility and representation is important, but I think us asking ourselves, what are we doing with our visibility, and what are we doing with our representation? And not to just become tokens, but as you said, I think sometimes once people start to fit you into boxes, you have to almost like pull yourself out of those boxes so that you don't get lost, so that you don't start performing what it is people think you should be as a Black and Native person, or, just seeing you as one or the other. And so, yeah, I think, again, what are we doing with our representation? What are we doing with our visibility is an important question that I think we have to continue to ask ourselves as activists, or, people who speak to Afro-Indigenous identity. One question that I'm really interested in, and maybe I can start with you, Kyle, because I know that you talk about this a lot. How does one's class status shape one's Afro-Indigenous identity? Do you think we divorce class from the discussions of Indigenous and Black identity?
Absolutely. Because, I grew up po, as I like to say, and often in a struggle to assert your identity, your humanity as an Afro-Indigenous person, as a Black person, as an Indigenous person, you can totally erase the dynamics of class, right? And I think it's an important discussion to continue to have, amongst ourselves, but also throughout Indian country. For instance, the connections between casino money and political economy and disenrollment, and who is enrolled into a tribe and who is not, right? That is an important conversation to have. And also how it impacts your life choices and your life experiences, right? My class status has certainly changed since becoming a professor, but you still have family and different experiences, and also social status is another component of class. And I think it's an important conversation to really carry forward and to have going forward.
Joy, do you want to add to that? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, there's two, I kind of think of this question in two ways, because I think about, class and kind of this connection with the identity that Kyle's talking about. And, I think about it in ways of, going back to this whole discussion we've talked about, like the res, right? Like, because me and my brother, we did not grow up on the res with our family. And my mom was the first person in her family to not only go to university, but also to get a master's degree. And that was a very big deal. So education was very important in our family, and it was very much in kind of, told that like you have to get the best education, give yourself the best chance. But there would be these instances where we would kind of not be shamed, but we would get, comments about the fact that we sounded white because we were educated, or that we, you know, grew up off reserve and we had, or my cousin's asking why I only had white friends and I didn't have any Native friends because my peers were different. And, you know, so there's these ways in which, and not even saying that our economic class, but just kind of the experience in which we grew up with kind of changed the way we were seen. So I think about, you know, class in that way and how we don't talk about those discussions when it comes to identity. And then I also think about just these ideas of how class and how our social and economic and commercial structures have worked to keep, you know, we've talked about this idea of, you know, like environmental and I'm just saying commercial racism as a way of keeping our people down. You know, we always look at these ideas of, you know, these land claims and these large settlements, especially in Canada, you know, all these things were settled and, you know, the community got this much money, but why are our communities still in poverty if we're getting this much money? You know, people are always wondering about these things. And it's because when you're in such a position where, you know, like these resources aren't being handled, we go back to the idea of band councils and, you know, these differences between different levels of government, because a band council is not a traditional government. It's a colonial enforced system of government that is now dictating these settlements with our governments themselves. So we're kind of already you're already negotiating from a position of repression, and now you're trying to find a way to deal with that. So there are so many different ways we could look at class in that instance and look at our communities in those ways.
And
Go ahead, Kyle.
I just want to quickly add one thing is also the issue of celebrity related to class. Like people love, I mentioned Kyrie Irving, and it's not a shot at Kyrie, of course, but many of our community will love this idea of celebrity, whether that's getting thousands upon thousands of followers on social media. And then they become the representatives of what it means to be Indigenous out in the world. And of course, you know, we suffer all sorts of invisibility, right? And so it's a big deal when Sephora has a campaign or the Nike N7 or whatever it is, right? Like, well, what about child exploitation connected to the production of Nikes? I mean, in a host of other conversations that need to be had. It's a major contradiction under capitalism to, you know, be invisible, then get some visibility, but then we don't continue to have those other crucial conversations. And I'm not willing to sacrifice visibility in mainstream America or mainstream Canada for the fact of continuing harm and exploitation that can happen to other people.
Absolutely. And I feel like there are, you know, relatively new instances where we've seen that, like you said, with ads or, you know, things where Native folks do get put on a platform and we use that to just, you know, hype up our celebrities. And we sometimes don't do the nuanced work that's necessary to also deconstruct ideas of indigeneity, right? We may not see Black natives or Asian natives or trans natives or, you know, the diversity within Native identity projected. We end up seeing those stereotypes, you know, kind of rehashed in these campaigns. And like you said, I'm not willing to forfeit, you know, the liberation and sovereignty of all Native folks for just a few, right? Autumn, I would love to, if you have any thoughts on this, I would love to hear your perspective.
I have so many different directions to go with this. For one, when we think about the celebrities that exist within Indigenous communities, there aren't really a lot. There aren't a lot, and it's not like we really are a group of people who really hold a lot of the wealth. And understanding that and speaking back on socioeconomic class and stuff like that, there's purpose in that, right? And there's purpose in that. And then when you were thinking about that, I was thinking about the narratives that are told within our society and the stereotypes that are associated with Indigenous communities, like, oh, you get a free ride to college, you don't have to pay taxes, all of these things that directly address socioeconomic class, but don't address the fact that Indigenous reservations in the United States are some of the most impoverished communities here. So it's like, okay, so why is this narrative that we just get a free ride out there? Because it's not true. I worked my booty off to get the degree I got, and I didn't have any support. There was nobody just giving me money. I worked 5 jobs and rode a pedal bike to each job just to make it so I could pay for college. And those aren't the narratives that we're told. We're not told the reality. We're told what sounds good, so you don't have to actually address the issues that are present. And I am a person who was born and raised on a reservation, and the narratives that are associated with that is so interesting too, because we need to stop the lateral violence. We need to stop hating on each other. And you guys have said it already. And if you grew up on a res or not, that doesn't make you any more or less Native. And as somebody who grew up on the reservation, I love Shinnecock. I love it. Can't wait to go home in September. Well, I can't wait to go home for Labor Day weekend and go swim in the ocean and go kayak the waters and go interact and be on my homeland. But the reality is that it's also a traumatic place. It's also a place where we're experiencing, we talk about historical trauma. What about the trauma of every day? The fact that the Shinnecock golf course is still, people and celebrities are still golfing on my ancestors' bones. That there are things that are happening back home that are depressing, that are sad. You know, there's a lot of wonderful things happening, but the experience of being a Native who grew up on the reservation isn't always something to be glorified. It's something that me personally, I'm going through therapy and going through dismantling a lot of the traumas that I've experienced. So when we talk about class, there's so many different directions we can go in, but we have to keep having these conversations and bring awareness to the fact of what are the real lived experiences and the diversities in that, in being Native, in being enrolled or not enrolled, and having access to grant funding or scholarship funding, and how that affects different groups of people and different tribal communities.
Absolutely. So I have a million questions I want to ask all of you, and I feel like we could have another full hour of conversation. We are running low on time, and so I have 3 questions that I'm just going to try to pack into one, and I'm hoping that you will use, that you will briefly try to answer all 3, so that, because I think these are 3 really important questions, but I think they all have to do with each other. So 1, what is Black Indigenous solidarity? Is that a thing? Question 1, how do we support Black and Indigenous youth, especially when talking about Black and Indigenous solidarity? And finally, because it is, this program is about Indigenous Peoples Day, as a Black Indigenous person, what does Indigenous Peoples Day mean to you? So maybe we can have Joy go first. So first question is, what is Black Indigenous solidarity? Second question, how do we support Black youth? And 3, what does Indigenous Peoples Day mean to you?
Yeah, so I think with solidarity, I think solidarity is really about relationship, and it's about connection, and it's about using that connection and relationship to kind of gather strength within each other and for each other. And I think, us sitting at these intersections as Black Indigenous people, we are, in that position to really, see what the power of those relationships can be. And I think we also see some of the faults. And I think that comes with being, a lot of our people don't either acknowledge or know our history when it comes to our relationships as Black and Indigenous or Black and Indigenous people. We ignore these interconnections. We ignore the racism that exists within our communities towards each other, or we ignore the history of past experience and past strength in solidarity movements. There was the Red Power movement and the Civil Rights movement that went hand in hand with each other in the United States, and that, both groups supported each other, but we don't really talk about the Red Power movement. We only talk about the Civil Rights movement. And we're at this place now again where, our Gen Z youth are at such this powerful place where they're using their voices and they're feeling safe and they're feeling this need to speak up and really kind of drive all these older generations to really think about these questions. And it's not like they have nothing to go off of. They have this history and these experiences and these connections and relationships to past solidarity movements to kind of ground themselves in, you know. And I remember when I was writing an article on this for the Globe and Mail, I spoke to past Senator Murray Sinclair, and he talked about the need for bringing back our elders into these conversations and finding that leadership within that. So when I think about, you know, solidarity, and I think about, you know, this future move into advocacy, I think what the power of this Indigenous Peoples Day is really, especially this year, is really kind of looking at, you know, how can we tie in our history and celebrate all these past movements and celebrate the success and celebrate, you know, the strength that's come out of these, and not just look at, you know, recognizing trauma, which is what I think we often do when we look at Indigenous and Native American history, or we look at Black movements as well. We look at this trauma and we look at these ideas. We really need to kind of, you know, start to see the power and how can we do that to address the trauma that's going on and really kind of, you know, go together so that more people understand the place that we're coming from.
Absolutely. Autumn, do you have anything to add?
When I think about the solidarity of Black and Indigenous communities, I think about the necessity of being open-minded, the necessity of not having judgment, the necessity of being patient, of being understanding. If you want to see true solidarity, you have to do the work on yourself first. Don't come to the table judging me because I grew up on a reservation or I didn't grow up on a reservation. Don't come to the table judging me because I decided to wear my hair in box braids and call myself Native still. Don't judge me and how I decide to show up in who I am, because we can't have the conversation, we can't move forward, and we can't do the real work if the people who are showing up to march, to fight, to work are fighting each other. So when I think about that solidarity, I think about the importance of being whole and working on yourself. And you could be working on yourself and still doing the solidarity work, but don't come to the table with your reservations. And the sooner you do that, the quicker we can move it forward. Because when we come together, we are so much more powerful. There has been vested and historical purposeful movements in dividing, because once you divide, you can conquer. So it's important for us to be solidified, and it's important for us to be unified, because if we want to dismantle oppressive systems that exist, then we have to stop being oppressive to each other.
Yeah, I'll be less than a minute. So for Indigenous Peoples Day, it's cool, but I think in a few years, if it's not already there, it'll just be a liberal celebration. And I don't want a day for celebration. I want justice. Let me be very clear about that. The other thing is, as far as solidarity, Black queer feminists, Audre Lorde told us that anything worth, in an essay called Learning from the 60s, anything that is worth doing by nature is difficult, right? We don't always get along, we don't always agree, but it's not going to be an easy thing to do. And one person who understood this, going off of what Joe was saying earlier, was Stokely Carmichael, who changed his name to Kwame Ture. He gave a fantastic speech in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1974. And he said that this is Native people's land, and my job is to help them get it back, right? And finally, in the aftermath of settler colonialism and white supremacy, meaning when it ends, and I hope it does, like what happens between Black and Native folks? What are we going to do when we get our land back? Just like in South Africa a few years ago, when the indigenous South Africans were reclaiming their land, they just took the land back from the Afrikaners or settlers. And what happens when we do that, and where do Black people and Afro-Indigenous people fit into that relationship?
Yeah, those are such pertinent questions. I'm going to let Joy, I know that you had a quick thought.
Yeah, my thought is 10 seconds, and all I want to say was just add on to what Amber said in terms of respect, and just respecting where everyone is at within their journey in regards to advocacy, because, we take a lot of time to, judge people who are not, standing up enough. And it's, people are all at their own place in their own time, and we can't judge where people are on their own journeys when it comes to advocacy.
Absolutely. And so, yes, I agree with everything you all said. And I think as Black Indigenous peoples who are doing this work, the best thing that we could do is support and love on our youth, and teach them that, Indigenous Peoples Day is not just one day. It is every single day. Everything that we do is to bring about Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty on this land and to dismantle white supremacy and settler colonialism. And I'd like to add racial capitalism. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for this conversation. I'm looking forward to more.
Thank you, Amber, Kyle, Autumn, and Joy for the incredible conversation and sharing your experiences. Follow our panelists to learn more and support their work and learn more about Black Indigenous experiences, and visit the resources you see here. Continue to follow us at the National Museum of the American Indian and future exhibitions such as Ancestors Know Who We Are. This will be an online exhibition featuring 6 Black Indigenous women, artists from diverse nations and areas of the United States. An artist featured in this exhibition, Pate Pettibon, Black and Salish descent, created this poster to show the Indigenous and Black community's support for each other. She states this is with a hope that this illustration appeals to young folks as they are the future. And we know the work we do today is not just for us, but for them as well. Thank you to everyone that has worked on our Youth in Action series, our panelists, our moderator, and those that came before us to make this possible. For more information about upcoming Youth in Action episodes and to explore other ways you can enjoy the National Museum of the American Indian from home, visit us at americanindian.si.edu. Thank you for joining us.